boss. You're the
Oh
you're the
my. Curt Doolittle, it is such a pleasure to be here sitting with
you
you.
too. Love you, man. Good morning.
It's
But I said, Brad's really the director here, right? Uh, I'm the
that was
trick.
a nice way to say what you
I'm
said.
the, I'm the trick pony. So, what are we just talking about?
I sent you this meme.
Oh, so you sent me this meme, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna record it.
Oh, yeah, it's
And
from
then I
Henry
was gonna
Hill.
go into some little thing there, and I forgot what it was. So,
Oh my.
so we. But anyway,
This is episode 230102.
okay, we're starting our new numbering system, I guess.
And hit like and subscribe. Hit notifications. Leave comments. And don't forget, you can go to the website, Proprietarian Institute, and leave donations to help with this work.
Yes. We'll get a lot more sophisticated with her. Right now, it's just donate to the institute. It's really we don't collect a lot of donations at present, because we're not for profit. So what we do is we put it costs more than you'd think to keep this thing going. It's not a hobby, it's at a hobby level cost, but with Martin on board, thanks to the most generous investor we have, who shall remain nameless, because I'm not sure he doesn't want to remain nameless. The Martin on board, we have a real level, but to pursue fairly shortly, we'll be able to donate to particular initiatives, or to particular initiatives, which will move the needle forward quite a bit. Um, anyway, I forgot where we were going.
It's okay. We're just getting warmed up, Curt.
Is that what it is? Well,
We have
I've
fresh.
had a cup of coffee. I should be more cogent than this, but I've been
I
working
want to
on
just. Oh, go ahead.
I've been working on how to explain uh how it's not how cells cooperate and why the body form is able to emerge.
Hmm.
Despite because we thought that there was all this information that's in the DNA, and it's not true.
Right.
It's really the dance between the cell, it's related, the cells around it, the molecular composition in each cell, and the DNA. So it's disturbingly or not, the DNA is more like a manufacturing plant that the cell, its environment, and its neighbors, the cell, its internal ecology, and its neighbors,
Right.
use to ask the DNA for what they need. So, as usual in nature, what we thought would be fairly simple is just turns out to be, fucking way more complicated. And
Oh
so,
my.
but it it what the good part about it is you lose the need for the designer, right? And so when you understand this, um and what emerges as fascinating is that just like the big miracle was that molecules could cooperate to create a cell, right? um and then intracellular cooperation could work, and then the absorption of where mitochondria come from, eukaryotic cells, is really it's the precursor to multiple cells,
Yes.
right? And then you get multiple cells can cooperate. Well, that's great, but the leap from internal cooperation, like eukaryotic cells, right, from molecular to internal to internal cellular cooperation versus extracellular cooperation, that's a big fucking leap, right? How does shit know what it's supposed to do, right? Well, now we know the path, right? We know that pathway, and the horror of it all is how complex it is. Now you can explain it simply, but the complexity of what cells do as they build a body form from a single, what do you
That's
call
right.
it? Blast, what's the blast called? The first cell,
Zygote.
blastocyte,
Yeah.
as the body form builds. That's just insane. So I'm trying to work. I was trying to work on that narrative a little bit, and it just, I don't know.
There's
You
a-
know, well, wait a minute. I'm almost done circulating
My apologies.
my circuit, which is that, you know, it's, to me, that's what divinity is. That, you know, I don't know how to describe it. It's the miracle. That miracle is what divinity is to me. You know, it just inspires me.
Certainly.
Anyway, so I wanted to.
There's a bulb that is grown by my wife's family traditionally at Christmas time called the amaryllis.
Yes.
And it is quite amazing to watch a plant pop a flower out that's fully developed. Like,
Yes.
whoa, because it's a complex thing that is just popping out, and it's fully formed. There it is. And it's just amazing to watch that it can be done. The cells cooperate to the degree to create a fully formed plant. It's amazing. Now, I had an arc of conversation that I wanted to engage upon as a warm-up.
You did.
I still do, actually, and I wrote it down so that I would not forget.
That's a good thing, usually.
And the title of the first part is called The Dreadful Prescience of the Son of a Linguist, Norbert Wiener.
The dreadful what?
Prescience.
Prescience of the son of a
Linguist.
oh,
Norbert Wiener.
was he a very cunning linguist?
I'm not aware.
Okay.
I'm only aware of the son, who's the son of the linguist.
Okay.
Right. And Norbert Wiener was quite a child prodigy. He got a PhD in mathematics at the tender age of 17 in 1910 from Harvard University.
No slouch.
And Norbert was quite a smart fellow. He was son of Jewish immigrants. And Norbert went on to solve complex mathematical problems for the United States government in the World War II, which they were all secret projects, revolved around the communication between machines.
Yeah.
He said he solved the same problem over and over again, and not all the secret compartments didn't know about it, but he solved the same problem for all of them. So the apex of his wartime career was to create a radar combination machine gun that aimed itself at airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 1949, 4 years after the war, he wrote a book called Cybernetics, which is, the construction of it was, what if we include a human being in the machine and the output of the human being is controlled by the machine environment that he's in? And this book is called Cybernetics, the subtitle of which is The Human Use of Human Beings. And that was in 1949. He invented the field. That's the first part. And now we're living in the culmination of Norbert's dream. And it is, I curse him. I curse him not on a daily basis, but with some frequency, because I am the recipient of this cybernetic dream. And it is a nightmare for me because he turned the computer, which was a tool that I used to do my job, into a tool, a yoke, with which the administrators can control me. And it is dreadful. That's part one. Now, part two of the story is the even worse diagnosis of Dr. Robert Malone, who invented the mRNA vaccines that have now been plaguing this world for the last 3 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just read an article by Dr. Malone, and he's extending the cybernetic dream to the fulfillment of it in the current milieu, which is the control of populations' emotional and psychological states by cybernetic means, which is exactly where we have found ourselves stumbled into. And that is what we are rebelling against, because it's like they control the social proofs through the social media and the news media and the media in general. Largely, not completely, but largely.
Okay, well, and so what's different about that than religion?
That's a trick question.
Well,
That was a good
wasn't.
question, because it's a trick question, because it's like this. Oh, you should have said, if you were a proper professor, you would have said, compare and contrast in an essay format. Here's your little blue book, and get to work. You have 2 hours, right? Because I don't see a difference. It's
There isn't.
reality by chanting, right?
What's the difference between norms and religions and what you're and the technological version, which is what you're saying? What's the difference between how they're communicated? Norms, imitation, enforcement. Religion, which is basically persuasion and indoctrination, and technology, which is saturation and environmental saturation. Because we learn from all three, right? We learn from the people
Okay.
around us, we learn from the words they say, and we learn from the greater environment. So one of the things that I used to talk about in marketing and advertising quite often was that you should think about spend more time thinking about how the environment in which a message reaches a market segment than you do about trying to get big wins by spending lots of money on things that appeal to a lot of people. And the reason is you probably can't predict that latter, and it's very costly. But what you can do is predict the former, and it's very cheap. And so what we saw early on in the technology revolution, this is important because it was only available to the upper middle castes, right?
Yep.
Is you saw the use of art and advertising mixed with technology to perform local events or stunts. But right, but and so that ended up working. But what's happened, of course, is that as the commoditization of that marketing has taken over again, it's crushed the initiative of the of what was originally being produced, which was reaching market segments with granularity, with specific messages. And so we always do this with, which is in order to increase market share, right? We always go to the race to the bottom. So I call, right? So that's what you're going to
It's
do.
interesting because it goes to this race to the bottom.
All scale races to the bottom. So the question isn't how do we scale most, globalism. It's how do we reach the largest scale that produces the largest permutation, in other words, experimentation or excellence. And the error of democracy is not knowing that
the limits.
The limit. And well, think of it as homeostasis.
Yeah.
The point at which people can still adapt, but you're not degenerating the idea. And so the problem is you have influence in the early stage of this excellence production, which is you have novelty production, but you have power in the latter stage. Does it make sense? You have influence in the experimental stage, but you have power in the democratizing or mass marketing stage, right? And so what we want to do is maintain experimentation, which is influence, but you want to prohibit power. And so the sequences that we have talked about are that the human behavior, which produces norms at small scale, like the 165 person tribe or band, or 150 person tribe or band, no, excuse me, tribe, band, tribe. Because the band is smaller, anyway, the network of 160 people, which consists of a tribe made of multiple bands of 16 to 20 something people. So in that sort of scope, the thing that allows us to form norms so that we can cooperate can be institutionalized as a religion, as an enforcement and insurance arm, as a state, but it can also be created as a religion or a state through propaganda. But the problem is there's no correction mechanism like there is at the band or tribe level. In other words, there's no means of equilibrating it with reality like there is at the level. So what's happens is we allow ourselves to accumulate we go from influence and correction to power and the inability to correct without greater assertion of power. So we move from organic to powerful. I don't know. I'm trying to rush through it, and I feel like I'm watching your eyes to see.
Oh, you're good. I'm writing it down. It's don't rush.
Okay.
So the power is not correctable.
The power isn't correctable. Correct. In other words, you need how does a natural coalition, right, in the XY in our triangle, in our diamond, how does a coalition form that prohibits power? When the truth is all three, exactly. When the problem is all three are essentially searching for power. The problem is the ones that search for power the most, the least advantageous, the state and religion. Right, they're the two opposing feminine religion, which is bottom up, and state, which is top down, male. Right, so these are sedition versus force. Right, and so the only one that we want to do is we're always looking for that homeostasis point, where there's an equilibration between them. So there's this goes back to who you always bringing up, the enlightenment fallacy. Is that
that's Dr. Enriquez's and he calls it the enlightenment gap.
The outline. So he like many intellectuals intuits a thing, but he can't reduce it to first principles and science it. So the problem with the enlightenment gap is this loss of homeostasis by another pursuit of universalism, repeating the error of religion. If our religions had stayed,
right. Okay, let's go over that more slowly, please.
The West uniquely prohibits the accumulation of power by use of trifunctionalism under the natural laws decidability.
Right, so it allows for influence,
but not
without the degeneration to power.
Correct.
Which is monopolistic, right?
Correct. It's a winner take all at the cost of all. So you see that the West continues its evolutionary velocity, at least once we get over the Christian destruction of the ancient world, and we start to rebuild Northern Europe again. Rebuild Europe again in the North this time instead of in the South. But everybody else just failed. China doesn't want to hear they failed. They know. Middle East, we know, not only failed, but they catastrophically went backward. India, did they fail? Well, the failure is they stagnated, right? And they didn't go very far. But so we can look at the degree of which this monopoly takes place as the means by which the rate at which stagnation occurs, and the depth of which stagnation occurs, and how fast that stagnation regresses.
Oh, this is a great segue. I want to thank you. Because it's like that the issue is this is and I sent a meme to Curt this morning in an email.
Oh, I see.
And it's a great segue because it's like this. What has occurred is that it's like reverse colonization.
Yes.
And the left would say we're stronger together, but they're flooding the engine. So the immigrants want to come get the benefits of Western civilization by relocating to Western civilization, because when the Western civilization came to them, it was under onerous terms that they couldn't tolerate.
Well, it was disruptive.
Like colonization was irritating to them. So now they're colonizing the Western civilization, hoping to get the benefits of Western civilization, but at such a rate as to flood the engine and destroy that which they seek. That's what it appears to be. And that, I don't think they are aware of it. It's accidental more than intentional.
People go to where they can get something at a discount. And if they
I
get,
don't know. That was good. Very
That's
not
it.
surprising.
so,
Okay, so
but the problem is that, and that's okay if we keep immigration numbers at a, in other words, if you say it takes 3 generations to integrate, and you keep immigration level where there's, whatever that percentage of the population is that can be fully integrated over 3 generations, you're not going to have a problem. Does that mean we can't have urban quarters where it's, the French Quarter? No, I mean, the problem is you have to keep them in the quarter, and they can't vote. They probably shouldn't own property.
all right. This is the other segue that I wanted to go to, which is this question, which is, Curt, this is related to the Institute for Natural Law and why they choose this symbol of the black swan.
Are you baiting me?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Well, I just don't
No,
know.
I think you're properly warmed up. You're just about totally warmed up now.
Well, you just started out with such an interesting arc, right? I mean, we can weave our way through that you ball of yarn, for hours and hours and hours at end until we've exhausted. The pattern has emerged by the exhaustion of the pathways. So wait a minute,
Why do we have the black swan as a symbol for the Natural Law Institute?
the reason I chose the black swan was Nassim Taleb's insight that perceived regularities are nowhere near as influential as unanticipated extremes. And matter of fact, the stuff we worry about every day is nowhere near as meaningful as the stuff we are unprepared for predicting. So it's the obvious argument that Taleb got it from, which is the same place I got it from, which is Minsky, which is that the Mandelbrot, excuse me. It's in my world, it's Mandelbrot. It's Minsky, Mandelbrot, Taleb. That's how I think of the sequence.
Okay.
But Mandelbrot was saying that the stock market is just noise as federal funds rates move through the economy. I mean, that's the simple terms, right? So it's
like
all
a giant rain stick.
right. It doesn't mean anything. And so what that is all based on is is the competition between news media, where the insider information that tells you where information is moving through the economy, and insider knowledge about what businesses are sort of moving, right? Because because, like, for example, if I was in one of the big investment banks, I would work in currency speculation, because it's absolutely deterministic to me. It's like fucking clockwork, right? But if you look on most people, what they're trying, the entrepreneur is betting on how it's going inside his economy and inside his business.
Right.
And then you're up here above the currency speculation and you're looking at global economies. And then if you're above that, you're up where Zion is, which is in geostrategy, which is demographics. Right. So there's this spectrum, but all the money's made down in here, right, where people have inside information. Right. And so they're all making money off of ignorance, other people's ignorance, right? So the problem is that does any of that making money off of ignorance do anything? Nothing at all. What matters is really, does Ling Fo and Wo Chu have 3 kids, 2 kids, 1 kid, or 7 kids? It's just a matter of time before the number of those couples makes its way through this particular system at what stage of development. That there's nothing, I mean, that's all there is, right? But if you get something like a war or a shift in trade policy or a plague or a series of natural disasters or whatever, or a technological disruption, you can't fucking predict those things. But they're the things that are there's the things that actually produce.
That's right.
Opportunity.
Significant change in the life.
So here's how I interpreted that is the black swan is that you have to do a full accounting.
Right.
And then you have to be rigorous in your suppression of error, because you can't predict what's good or bad. You can, what he would say is build your country as anti-fragile.
Yes.
Which is that you need to make sure that you handle that, maintain that equilibrium, which was that point of homeostasis, because anybody who gets into a monopoly will exhaust the adaptability of the demographic of the population.
Yep.
Did I make that clear enough?
I want you to repeat it just to make certain that you did, because I understood it.
Okay. So tie back to our previous thread is that you're trying to preserve a point of homeostasis where innovation is still here, but people are not too stressed by adaptation, right? Innovation still occurs, but people are not stressed by
The
the
demand for adaptation, right?
What determines that point is your demographic composition. Are you smarter? Or are you dumber? Smarter, dumber.
Oh, this is very good.
Right, it's it. It's really that simple.
Right.
Because what is smart? It's the rate of adaptation in time.
Capacity to adapt.
Right. That's why I don't like smarter, dumber, intelligent, whatever.
Yes.
The reason I like the way I view intelligence is adaptation in time. Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And it's more like how many, and so you get adaptation in time, but what that really means is how many lily pads do you need to get from A to B?
Right.
Right. So some people need lots of fucking lily pads.
Yes.
They run out of energy before they get across the lake.
Right.
And some people need 2 lily pads.
Yes.
Most of what I do when people study my work is that I'm crossing a lake, which is pretty wide, really. Yes. Right. And I'm trying to generate lily pads that people can jump across by first principles.
Yes.
Right. So there's a way to get there. But what you'll notice is I do long chains of reasoning, which you are very familiar with right now, because yes. Even still, I have to say, let me finish, right? Because
it's true.
Because the long chains of reasoning are sometimes very long chains of reasoning with multiple intersecting causalities. So this when I do these lily pads, essentially I'm writing a supply diagram, a supply demand diagram for each lily pad, and showing how it changes from state to state. At least that's what I'm in the abstract. That's the way to describe what I'm doing. But the problem is people can't make it past the third lily pad before they run out of intellectual gas. In other words, their window of logical preservation of state they can use to identify a cause and effect is very short. So this is why most thought consists of a simple leap from A to B. But the problem is everything you and I talk about isn't A to B. It's A to B to C to D to E to F to G. And you lose people because they can't make it that many lily pads, that many steps in an argumentative cycle. So what we try to do, and what you've gotten me to be much better at through water on the rock torture of me, is to try to create as many narratives as possible through many dimensions, so that if you only can get a little bit of, we can get farther. But I still get people who like, you don't make any goddamn sense, right? Or I can't follow you, or it's all magic words or something like shit like that. I mean, I can only simplify it so far, because
right.
It's hard.
The issue is we've been doing analysis of various phenomena by this technology that you have got with this science. It allows the variety of perspective to be shown on each existing pathway. And
Correct.
that reinforces the pathway for the listener.
Correct. And it's the same thing you and I keep saying. Well, it only seems crazy until you realize that, well, there's only like 15 points.
That's right.
Right.
But that's a lot.
But that's
That's
actually
really
a lot.
So, because there's permutations on combinations
right.
of 15 at every perspective. So it's
Correct.
like, okay, it's the stars. There's 15 stars, and they're organized in space, and they look different from different perspectives.
Yes.
So we're looking at them from all different perspectives.
And we're also fighting our natural intention to justify an intuition or prior. Right? We have this desire to come to a conclusion that justifies us. And the hard part is getting over that. Right? You have to say, I know I want to jump to this conclusion, but have I falsified my intuition against these 15 points? It's fucking work. I mean, I don't
It's work.
It's
I think it has to do with this is the people are not able to make a long chain of reasoning because they have an association that occurs midway.
Correct.
And the association is so strong that they can't overcome the inhibition to listen or inhibition to speak to allow them to listen because they can't accept the premise that was just stated in the chain so far.
But isn't this what thank you. But is this what happens in populations? Is shit trickles down from the 160s to the 140s to the 130s to the 120s to the 110s.
Right. Oh, so it's white swan.
What?
Dog bites man, huh?
Yeah. So it's just these ideas.
We don't even talk about that. Dog bites man, white swan. Yeah, yawn.
So you asked me where the black swan came from.
Oh, so I get it.
The thing is that we have to build in a society that's resistant to evil. Therefore, any good that emerges is good. If we don't do that, then we don't know whether what's going to emerge is going to be good or bad, right? And it's sort of like first principles, right? I mean, it's just like first principles. If you could construct it from first principles, it's probably not false. Well, if you could construct it from moral principles, it's probably not false. I mean, immoral, right? And so the consequences create, so this is the hard part, is the incentive is to overgrow, right? That's what our incentive is.
It's cancer.
Right? It's cancer. And so what every European civilization has done so far, India didn't, is we have tried to expand our markets beyond those capable of the kind of markets we produce, because the problem of the point of this equilibrium, which is less adaptation, less adaptation, less innovation, to more adaptation, more innovation, right? We can do that. Why can we do that? Because we have trifunctionalism and high intelligence. Christianity didn't hurt either, by the way. Right? Didn't hurt a lot. It was pretty damn good, really. So the problem is you can't expand Europeanism beyond people with European levels of IQ. Worse, they have to have full European culture. They have to be indoctrinated in full their culture to maintain that. Even such, you will have the priesthood, which is the academy, because that's where new priesthood is, right? Academy media, right? And the state, which is I mean the bureaucracy, right? Those are the two things. The bureaucracy of state, or the commercial sector, right? They will all try to accumulate more.
Right. So I want to clarify for the audience when he says the state, the bureaucratic state, it is the administrative state. It's the administrators of the state. So the bureaucracy.
So the problem is, whenever you want to get more, you're moving that needle from innovation versus adaptation. In other words, a point of homeostasis. Whenever you're doing that, you're actually suppressing innovation. And at the but people don't want to adapt. I mean, if people have the choice of getting wealth, what does that mean? I don't need to adapt. Right? That's how they see it on the left.
That's right. I get to get without work.
Right. Whereas what does the right see? I get to capitalize, right? Increasing future opportunity, creating future discounts. But capital stays and consumption goes, right? I mean, that's the difference between the words, right? Consumption and maladaptation, or a capitalization and an adaptation. Well, what's the difference between the terms capitalization and adaptation? There fucking isn't any. Capital is the external manifestation of the internal behavioral change that we call adaptations. I don't, I mean, it's, anyway.
I want to talk to the audience a little bit just to help clarify Curt's wildness. I'm translating Curt's wildness a little bit for the audience. I'm trying to give more lily pads.
Okay.
That's my job. So it's like this. We had this arc of conversation, which it's made a good recovery back to an original state, which is we were talking about norms, religions, and technology, and the trifunctional nature of the adaptive state of Western civilization devolving into a monopolistic, power-hungry state.
Yep.
Which is maladaptive. And now Curt has fully explained why, because it's like this. It's like innovation and adaptation are opposed to power and non-adaptation.
Yep.
And so the trifunctional thing is how do we maintain the balance between the population and their needs, their adaptive needs and capacities within the trifunctional state without devolving to power, because power will destroy the adaptive necessity for the population, and the population will stagnate and devolve. Is that fair?
It's perfect. Thank you. I don't think I could have said it that briefly.
That's why I come here. I enjoy this so much. I do. It's like, okay, because it's like there is no other way across this grand pond.
Well, I mean, it's like everything else. It seems the minute you start moralizing it and you don't understand, you start seeing the world as people as oppressive or conspiratorial or whatever, when it's just a natural human sortition process, which is really, physics just doing its job.
Right. So if you think of it, then so in terms of populations, they have adaptive capacities, which would register in the psychology department as the IQs of the population. The population will have a different distribution of IQs between populations, and they will have different adaptive capacities in our nomenclature. And therefore, they will have different demands for authority, which we would call power, in our political understanding. And they will have different capacities to accumulate capital because of that.
Correct.
That's the
and what does accumulated capital do? Capital results from the suppression of impulse for consumption, leading to discounts on future returns. And so, whereas consumption, see, the problem is capitalization reduces consumption, which reduces reproduction of the unfit. Let's take this further. This is going to terrify you.
Oh my.
All right. Hyperconsumption, which is what's going on now, results and what I call racing to the bottom or democratization produces expansion of reproduction of the underclass, which is the reverse of capitalization, and the consumption of reproduction of the intelligent.
Yep.
Upper classes. So it's a really simple bit of math you can't get around. So
that was a challenge to all listeners. Anybody who thinks that they can reverse this logic or prove it to be false, good luck. And there's a comment section below for this purpose.
They'll do what they always do, which is like they'll try to say that, if only. Well, I mean, there's no if.
Right, it will be this. It's like
if only the laws of physics were different, people would act differently. I mean,
that was pretty rude. I like that.
Well, I mean, it's like the urbanization thing. Why do people like urbanization? Because you feel like you're amidst plenty, and you feel like, quite correctly, you have the least responsibility, and because you have no capacity to take responsibility, generating demand for authority, right? Which only increases conflict because natural processes can't alleviate differences. So what happens, of course, is anybody competent, innovatively competent, has to leave the urban area, called white flight, and it becomes a small, which is what we see universally in the world, a small urban elite against a large urban underclass, and a suburban and rural reproductive classes, right? Healthy reproductive classes. Or you see what we see is happening in Japan, and is that the total urbanization is total collapse. Population. I don't doubt the Japanese can fix this. They won't fix they don't need to fix rates of reproduction. What they need to fix is preservation of their smart fraction, which they have, right? And preservation of their culture and homogeneity, which allows them to pay the cost of this transition, while and instead rely on robotics, which is what they're doing, and it's working famously because they're Japanese. It's like the Germans, they're the same fucking thing, right? They're just going to get it right. The Germans are have been fucked over by the immigration thing, so we'll have to fix that. But the Japanese have got it right. Anyway, so yes, you were right, and I just needed to insert the horrific understanding that it's one thing to complain about a thing, right? It's another thing to show that it's an equilibrium and you can't do anything about it, which is what we do a lot of, right? We do the male-female contrast. We do it's like it's an immutable law of physics because we're just an expression of physics, right? I mean, so we are. Consumption versus capitalization, which is population versus capitalization, which is reproduction versus capitalization, which is distribution versus concentration, which is negative entropy versus positive entropy. It's the same fucking.
Right. So what is it? It's like capitalization is the accumulation of matter and energy.
Yes.
And consumption is the distribution of it into it's like creating a space to absorb all that surplus,
right?
And it dissipates.
If the liberals want it, it's bad. If middle-class American moms want it for their kids, it's probably okay. I mean, it's really that simple. If you want a middle-class mom who's got 3 or 4 kids, and she wants it for herself, it's probably okay. But anyone on the feminine cognition who wants things for everybody, it's probably bad. That doesn't mean
for everybody is a curse.
Well, it's like the center left isn't wrong, right?
Right.
The center left says, well, we need to get rid of these parasites in the financial sector, whatever. Agree.
There is no doubt that's correct.
And the right agrees, except that we want to get rid of the parasites in the government too. But the center left sees the government as protecting them. But they're not only protected, they're protecting them because of the people that are the parasites that the government is allowing and allying with. So the problem for the left is that they have is there's no limit. In other words, the left today, remember it was a progressive Christian left before the war and a Jewish communist left after the war. So today, so the progressive left in the pre-war was pro-eugenic because it would lead to a betterment for all. If we could wind the clock back to pro-eugenic progressives pre-war, right, it would be fine because they could go off and say, well, we need to just cut the reproduction of these people in the underclass so that we can use the cost that they're forcing on us to take care of people who are just merely disadvantaged. The problem is nobody wants to say they're defective and these people are disadvantaged. They're pretending all these people are disadvantaged instead of defective. Now, are they defective in sub-Saharan Africa? Absolutely not. I mean, go live there. Life isn't that bad in a tribal community. Matter of fact, it's kind of emotionally comforting. Right?
It's just a different balance point.
Well, right, because they're living connected to nature and they need less complexity. So, but if you look at, so what's happened, of course, is this whole false promise that we get of equality and everything is that we've eliminated the ability to prohibit immigration of the underclasses. Nobody gives a shit if we're going to get more Indian doctors, although doctors out of India are questionable at this point. But if nobody cares if we're going to get more high talented people, really, it doesn't hurt us. But the real problem is all these people from what's essentially the developing world who have IQs in the 90s and 80s.
They're not properly normalized to the circumstance of this civilization.
And they can't be. That's the problem. They can't be. Can't be normalized to this levels.
It's unreasonable.
That's why you're seeing the return of the black community to African marriage. In other words, the black community and the white lower class community, absent the institutions of the family rigorously enforced by the church and the state, right, and supported by baby mama redistribution by the state, is restored to their natural condition of the African family. And it's taken the white lower classes down with them. And you want to make yourself poor, study family systems and try to promote Rudyard's.
Rudyard is what
I'm trying to promote his recent video on family, so I have to do less work explaining it.
That's a form of capitalization, right?
Well, it's just like I have all this. I don't have all, but I have a list of his videos. I haven't updated. I was talking to him the other day. I need to update that list, and I just want to link those to sections.
Yes,
it provides all this historical, highly accessible historical context for all these things that I don't have to do. So he just does the family thing extremely well. I mean, he goes beyond. Oh, fuck's his name? Emmanuel. Todd. He goes beyond Todd. Todd's really the guy who invented this stuff. I mean, that's not really true. Engels wrote the first really good piece on family that I remember, which was a long fucking time ago. Marx and Engels. It's fucking brilliant.
right.
But Emmanuel Todd is trying to deal with why is Europe different? L'invention d'Europe, right? He wrote this book, The Invention of Europe. And he's talking about family structures in Europe and how they determine the ethics and morals of the different places. All right, but I mean, other people have taken this and just gone with it everywhere. I mean, Emmanuel Todd's basic analysis of world systems, and so what a faultist has taken all that together and put out a beautiful little video on it of world systems. Like most people, he talks in terms of history and philosophy, and I tend to I'm an analytic. philosopher technically, right? So I tend to break things down into the underlying science a little bit more detail,
Just physics.
it's just physics. So, but I think his study is fantastic for people to listen to.
That was
Okay, go ahead.
that was a plug.
Well, I'm gonna
It's all
like
right.
I plug a very small number of people, really.
That's correct.
I plug him. I plug Zyhan often because we're in a period where Zyhan's highly effective. And like, who's the economist you bring up all the time? Martin, is it Martin?
Oh, Armstrong.
Armstrong. Armstrong was the early guys who was saying it's demographics and everything, right? So Zyhan sort of made that. He's made that into the public consciousness. So I plug Zyhan. I plug what's the guy's name that does the geostrategy? Caspian report. His name is Shervan. Plug Shervan. I plug What If Alt Hist. I plug I think it's Gods and Generals or Kings and Generals. I can't remember what it is. For their history of warfare. And I plug I should have started with the beginning. Then back to the beginning, I plug Economics Explained. And for my favorite day-to-day analyst, who's I plug Stoic Media. So I mean, if you follow just those, I'm not going to go into the super nerds, like, these are the people who teach basic understanding of the spectrum of what's going on in the financial markets today, to the economy, to the geostrategy, to the organs of history, to the geostrategy, the organs of history, to the great battles and events of history. Right. And so I tend to like see that as what most people need in order to understand the world we live in. If you want to science it, I'll tell you why. Science it, right? But I mean, we need judges to know what I know, right? All right, what I do. But we need common people to have that. Not common people, but we need people in the middle class at least.
Middle people, right? The middle class.
They need to
a common
understand
understanding of the productive classes.
Right. And if you get that, then you're probably fine. If you get out, the truth is, if you get outside of that, outside of those people I just mentioned, and you get outside of those topics, right, which I consider pretty scientific, right? I mean, all the way from finance to economics to geostrategy to history. If you go outside of that, it degenerates really fast. I'm trying to work on psychology that's not false right now, which is why I said at the beginning, I'm trying to find out that I'm trying to get a psychology of biology that's not false. What reading list? Not reading list. What videos can I send people to that? Oh, my fucking the thing is way over there. What videos that aren't stupid?
Right. It's
a small number, but I will say that the guys, there is an emerging layer of guys in their 40s who have emerged in the same generation as the other people I've mentioned. They're all younger,
right?
But they're just a little bit ahead of them. There are a small group of people in evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology that are worth listening to, right? If with a little prevarication, a little, right? And these people are just coming up through the bubble now. They're just below the threshold of becoming the next generation of people you listen to.
That'll be on the short list.
Right. And it's not, I'm not like special that I know these people, like, who's his name? Curt has done a pretty good job of trying to bring them together. And what's surprising is Lex Friedman isn't. And when he does, he asks the wrong questions. It's kind of funny. So I'm not the only person that sees these emergent people. It's
Right.
like I wish I could recommend David Deutsch in physics, because he's a fellow Popperian, right? But he's just like, he's too fucking far off, right? I just can't.
He's deviating a little bit too much.
He's just got woo woo in there, he's just got, and I just can't, unless you understand the European mind and the testimonial, the testimony, so that you cannot engage in inspirational
Whoa.
woo woo on top of it that implies even more woo woo. I can't stand it, and I like Deutsch, but he just he wants to be a rabbi more than he wants to be a jurist. It's okay. I'm not no.
That was about as rude as Curt gets. That's quite rude.
I mean, we have our people that do that. I mean,
I know.
I'm not alone. I mean, we have guys who are trying to be. I mean, I always shit on McGilchrist all the time. McGilchrist all the time.
Yep.
Because I think he's an asshole. I mean, he's like always trying to be a priest, right? I mean, just fucking don't add the woo, right? He's just got to do it. He feels like he's got to get up there and, like his aunt, like my ancestors.
It's because he's a literature professor. He thinks he has to make it like great literature or something.
I guess. I don't know. It just drives me nuts.
He's just trying to tell a story, right? That's interesting.
I kind of like, what the thing I think I like in common?
Hmm.
Like, I apologize a lot for providing the insights that I apologize, right? Because I realize they're not.
Right, because it's so rude. It's like, yeah, sorry about your sacred
Yeah.
cow that's back there in the slaughterhouse.
I actually prefer the generation of guys who are apologetic about uncomfortable truths. Because they're,
That's reasonable.
right? And so I think a lot of these people are saying, well, our it's paternal love rather than maternal love.
Yes.
Maternal love tells you, wraps the unpleasant and woo-woo to preserve your
Dignity
delusions,
or something.
right? Whereas the paternal asks your forgiveness for apologetically delivering something you may not want to hear, right? And I prefer that. I prefer those people like Reich and his genetics. I mean, he's a fucking master of it, because he's Jewish guy. He talks softly and forgivingly. He's very nice, right? But what he's really telling you is races exist, and you're going to have to get over it, right? And there's a big difference between the races, and you're going to have to get over it. So we have to learn. But he doesn't hit you in the head with that until he's gone through the whole thing, and then he says it. So the reason I like about Economics Explained, he tells you this whole story, right? At the end, he explains, I understand how you would, he's basically saying, I understand how we'd like it to be, but this is how it is, right? It's this paternal, or it's uncle or grandfatherly, right? I mean, I don't know. It's a very paternal way of saying, not I'm right, look at me, right? This is how it is, right? They're not doing that. They're saying, here's how it is.
The coach is like this.
Right.
I understand.
It's just how it is, brothers. We got to work with what we got. But this is what we got, and so I kind of like this, the paternal apologetic team. Yeah, it's a team. You're right. It's coaches. It's team play, right? It's team play.
Right. It's just, it sucks. And the coach says this is the coach's job. My coach is 71, right? And so the coach is like this. He does all the workouts everybody does in the CrossFit. And the coach is like this. You're doing something he's trying to get you to perform, right? He goes, my job is to whisper the secret thing in your ear that causes you to try.
Yes.
And he looks, I shoot him the daggers look, because it's like fucking awful, this shit I'm trying to do. And I'm trying to perform. And I look at him and he just goes, I know. He does know. And
he does.
And I can't make it not suck. Just try some more. Keep going.
Well, I mean, that's actually a beautiful metaphor. I like we should work with that a little bit, because the angry "you need to obey me because I'm right" pitch really annoys the fuck out of me, right? And even when they're right, I'm like, well,
Yeah,
you're
but you're an
deli-
asshole, so I'm
well,
not
well,
following.
well, I
And
mean,
you're an asshole, and I'm not following.
I will because I'm immune. But it's
Mm,
but
mm.
I don't care that you convince me. I'm going to be convinced by the facts either way, right? But I care about the people that aren't me, right? That
That
they
right, that you're adversely affecting their capacity to follow that logical chain.
right. I felt a little bit like his name's speechwriter there. He writes all these. Oh, Jesus Christ. My nose bothers me, so I can't remember nouns again. Can't remember. Anyway, he's written a bunch of books. He's out one of the top conservative writers. And when did he write the Churchill book? Yeah. Anyway, he's always conservative in that he's accusatory. Right. And I'm like, well, it might be true, but the problem is those of us who live in that world, we just don't hear the words. We just hear the facts. We don't hear them. But when you're talking to ordinary people and they're like, I want to sit in a room with you and learn from you. Nobody wants to sit in a room and learn from you when you're talking like that. Right? Because they don't know. They want to sit in a room for you, and they want the environment to communicate to them paternal care. Right? The paternal or the coach, right? I'm trying to help you get along. And there's some people that want to sit in a room and hear maternal. You don't have to do anything. You're just a pretty young flower, natural, just as you are, right? And so we want to sit. You got to teach something to somebody in the language that they want to be at dinner with you, right? I mean, it's just or in a room with you, and the angry man thing doesn't work.
That's right.
It just doesn't work. So, which I have an implastic personality, and I have to go and play King of the Hill games with people who drive me fucking nuts. So thanks to Dr. Brett, I gave up that little exercise.
Avocation.
It was one of the most useful things anyone's ever got me to do, really, even though it took you a while. This was ruining my attitude. All right, so I've dragged that down into a discourse. We've had a beautiful arc here
I
from the
enjoyed it.
very beginning. We've had a beautiful arc. What else is in your?
That's it, Curt. I'm just getting started. I just said, oh, I'll warm you up.
Okay.
I'm interested in this. It's increasing consciousness. It's very quickly occurring, which is the cybernetic and the monopolistic attempt, the attempt at monopoly by the administrative state combined with the tech companies to control the psychological and emotional state of the population for power. It's increasingly obvious that this is what's occurring, and it's interesting to me that we have this generally in the common conversation.
Well, some obvious things. The Abrahamic method, represented by the Jews, is not equal to the Christian female progressive movement's ability for desire for us to use the newfound wealth of the industrialization to add features of the state which alleviated the difficulties of the bottom. It was not the attempt to produce a state within a state. It was an attempt to expand the utility of the state to produce a more Christian, what they viewed as a more Christian government, right? More desirous of adopting transference of the previous institutional duties of the church to the more wealthy institutional duties of the state. right? That was the progressive movement. But the post-war Jewish communist left movement is an attempt to build a state within a state, the same way that the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians originally attempted to build a state within a state through gradual conversion and usurpation of power, right? But of the bottom. So what we're seeing is, if you look at these companies, the ones that behave very badly in the sense you're like, are any of them run by white people? No. So they have two conflicting interests. They're not at least two. First of all, they have an interest in commerce over contribute over in other words, the state within a state and its new priesthood have a more self-interested objective than the progressive movement had.
Yeah.
Right. That movement is actually global because that's the reach of these companies is global. And in many cases, the people in San Francisco are whites, the whites and their culture a minority, right? A third of the population. So when you have the majority, you have non-white founders and administration, especially have Jewish founders administration. If you have non-white or especially partly anti-white immigrants as your working population, and if you have global revenue streams and global ethics as your goal, you're not going to end up with the previous church that was trying to advance the transfer of relatively poor church functions into the much wealthier industrial state in order to alleviate the stresses of the poor. You have generated a warfare against the European civilization instead of an integration. And so when you look at it, it shouldn't be surprised the incentives, the world model and the incentives of those people, given the Marxification of, the claims of colonialism and whatever. They don't look at all the goods Western civilization did. They just look at the ability to make wealth and power and advantage and promote their metaphysics and their culture within this framework. So, I mean, my argument would be is that if Microsoft is indeed an Indian company, move it to India. If Google is an Asian company, move it to Asia. Or we have to regulate that content that's sent in the West has to do what China is doing, which is has to satisfy Western metaphysical necessities, not attempt to produce a state. So we had the church want to produce a state within a state. It succeeded by destroying Rome, but it didn't succeed in the Germanic peoples. It managed to make a loose federal government to legitimize, but that was the best it was. And then the church was captured by the aristocracy and essentially became part of the state, which is now most demonstrated in either the dysfunction of Italy or the feminism of the feminine authoritarianism of France. The same thing is happening here, is that we have a state within a state, which we first thought would be the academy as it replaced the state, well, the church, because it was effectively, the church was an educational administrative institution for and so the church as the church declined, the academy took over the intellectual leadership that the church has previously provided, so bifurcating the church. And the church ended up with progressivism as the political wing of it. And that was fine, right? That wasn't too much of a problem until the post-war period when the neo-Marxists came over and took over our academy. They converted from a European, which means Darwinian, which means loyal, persistence vehicle for the administration of the state, given the combination of Aryan, which means aristocratic, and Christian ethics, and instead turned it into the academy into a weapon by which to undermine Western civilization and to create funding for all these seditions against Western civilization, which we know as neo-Marxism, postmodernism, feminism, libertarianism, conservatism, PC, and woke, right? They've just gone through funding. That's how they fund it. That's their tax system. Well, if the church collected tithes, right, to do their sedition, so to speak, the academy does the same thing. They collect diplomas. A diploma is basically a license for a white collar job.
Hey, let's go back a little bit. It's not a license, it's an indulgence.
Well, I just didn't get to that word yet.
Oh, sorry. I hate to jump into the next one.
And therefore it's just an indulgence, right? It's an indulgence applied to the world we live in versus the world we will live in after death, right? But it's the same thing. So we have the formation of this is why Christians get mad at me, and I'm sorry, but the Christian destruction of the ancient world that was the same means. They use a Jewish vanguard. They create a Christian host population, and they destroy the aristocratic state from the bottom up, from within, by accumulating power, right? And then the same thing Islam does. They go in, they demand special treatment, and they reproduce like crazy until they can incrementally undermine institutions from the bottom up. And this is just a strategy of female undermining. Well, I mean, that's war, right? I mean, it's warfare against us, and we are having this done. And the women are unfortunately the easy victims of false promises, because they're saying you don't have to adapt. We're going to support you emotionally and psychologically, even if what you do is maladaptive and contrary to the interest of the polity. So, women are the vehicle by which undermining is spread. Once you're there, there's enough men who are feminine bias, it's just 25% of them, 30%. And then you have the men who would profit from taking power over this seditious culture, right? Who become basically the deep state, and you've destroyed the every value that's made the Western civilization exceptional and survive where other civilizations have collapsed. And that is that we created a universal military of everyone, where your duty was both military, public, and private, where our classes were ranks, and you were, as long as you did the duty of your class, you were due respect. And then we've used the law to incrementally suppress corruption and suppression and criminality until we produced the high trust polity at the bottom that was sort of present at the top. And, out of that, we got the rapid evolution of Western civilization compared to all others, just like we got it under aristocracy in the medieval world, in the ancient world, and just as we got it under aristocracy in the Indo-European expansion. So, I mean, the history is pretty obvious why this works. It's that there's an optimum way of organizing society that produces the highest trust, the greatest ability to work with the greatest evolutionary velocity and the highest adaptive velocity. And we discovered it because we just happened to stumble on one principle, which we call the prohibition on authority, which generates individual sovereignty. So,
this reminds me of the basically the understanding of the Marxist viewpoint is that they don't care what they say. They will say anything because all that matters is the power relationships involved. It's just power.
right.
And when I say that, I mean it in the context of power as we discussed it before, which is winner take all at the expense of all.
Yes.
And that is the objection, which is that their basic understanding of the way the world operates is degenerate, in that it is based on power and not based on a trifunctional influence. That's for the audience, it's not for Curt.
Well, I mean, the Jewish and the Jewish community is female and based on devotion. so it's not, they don't do loyalty, they actually recoil against loyalty. So of course, whenever they go anywhere, they recoil against the loyalty demanded of them.
Hmm.
And this only reinforces their isolationism, their separatism, which only reinforces their power over one another into conformity. Well, the same thing is true of Islam, is that, it's basically it's a religion for underclasses. It's a religion for the bottom. But that bottom tells you can be virtuous just by following these fucking rules. I mean, you don't have to do anything except dog level training. So, I mean, so what happens though is that they're extremely demanding, and they're seditious from underneath. But because we can't tell the difference between a religion which has no political and material aspirations, purely psychological Buddhism, and a political system which uses religion as a marketing device. Because we don't disambiguate them, we don't say, well, in Christianity, you understand? In Christianity, we separate those two things. So the church, the faith is for the spiritual, and the state is for the material, and never the twain shall meet. Well, this disempowers the evil of the religion. It makes it a social and psychological religion. It doesn't make it a political one. But the state, however, our aristocracy will give loyalty to the feminine, right? Just like they will, and they expect loyalty from the church, right? This tends to work out okay. But in the Abrahamic religions, the Jewish and Islamic religion, what these things are doing is they're seditious religions. That your idea is to the religion itself and the consequences of that religion, instead of this balance of power of trifunctionalism between the truth, the law, the state, the power, and the faith, which is the feminine, seduction and security and care. So these are political systems. They're not really. Judaism is a political system. Islam's a political system. Christianity was originally just a wisdom literature, a good cult, but the Nicaeans made it a political system, like the Jewish and the Muslim. And we've been fucked our religion ever since. I mean, it's just sad. So when I talk about Protestant evangelicals, I was like, well, these are the people are the closest to the original Jesus teachings. And if you look at what's disintegrating, it's the institutional religions that attempt to be a state. But what's happened is the irrational version of the religion through the academy and the media is replacing the supernatural church, right? The organization system. So the organizational system is the one that's achieving political power, and the others are losing political power. So the only way to prohibit this, of course, is to prohibit hostile religions that are not religions at all. They're political systems. And how can you tell the difference? Because they demand themselves equal to law rather than equal to wisdom. And what's the difference? The difference is when they intercedes in the political. I mean, Christianity is not complicated. It's basically a psychological religion that produces social benefits. It's reinforced by social means, which reinforce the value of the psychological benefits of practicing Christianity. Right? But the minute you try to make a state out of it or whatever, now you've gotten to the problem of the other Abrahamic religions. They're just seditious, which means they intrude on reality with what is a purely spiritual domain. And we've separated spiritual, emotional, psychological, feminine from practical, which is state, and commercial, truth, reciprocal. Sorry, I've been a little bit of a rant there.
No need for that. We're doing all right.
Can I pause and get another cup of coffee?
Absolutely, because I'm out too.
Okay, we're going to pause and come right back.
Here, we're back. Oh,
we're back. Little nasal spray and a little coffee.
Coffee.
All right. I feel like there's something left. That's a dangling bit of something out there that I wanted to touch, but I forgot. So they're you've sent me this meme, which is quite cute, which is what this history of what migrants want, which is you need our labor to escalating to give us all your stuff.
Right. Which resonated because it goes to what I call the 5 rude questions, which is why shouldn't we kill you and take your stuff?
Yes.
What's really interesting to me is the defeatism of the modern woke nutcases who are like, dude, kill us and take our stuff.
They don't realize that's what they're saying.
I think they do realize that's what they're saying. They don't understand what it means, or they don't speak English anymore. They don't understand the ramifications of it, or they don't care, or it's like, what was it? What's nihilistic?
The left doesn't think.
Oh, it's internally consistent. It makes me feel good until I die.
No, they just don't. They just want. And they come up with excuses for what they want and justifying what they want. And they come up with critique to undermine. But they're incapable of invention. And they're certainly capable of a reciprocal invention, because reciprocal invention will require that they work and adapt, and they don't want to do that. They want to, it basically means they're children. Now, the manosphere is going way beyond. The rate at which the manosphere is truthing the female is terrifying to me.
How is that? Why?
Because I've only paid attention to it for a year.
That's right.
The progress.
Wait, and the women are making their own group that's doing the same thing.
Which is
they're truthing the women by feminine means. They're having conversations that are women talking about the same thing. And it goes to that Pearl is one of them. It's pearly things, just pearly things, or something like that. Those ladies they're right on the money, and they are right over the target, saying what's real is really happening is really happening.
It's just bizarre to me. I mean, who would have thought? I mean, it's one of those things of, it's okay when it's in the nether sphere. When you people in the talking classes do your shit, we can ignore you, right? I mean, that's how the average person, like, I don't pay attention to those idiots, right? I barely pay attention to the news, and when I do, I don't believe it, right? And then there's you people in the talking classes, you come up with all your virtue signaling bullshit, we just ignore you, right? But bring it down and have it touch my life, and people will react to it. Old argument.
Right. So it's like the truth is arcing over through the nonsense at a rate that is unpredicted, right? And it's getting traction in a manner that's unpredicted too. That's kind of what the manifestation.
It's also bottom up, which is fucking hysterical to me. You know, it's
yes, because that's what's the funny part about it, because it's not credentialed.
Right. So Weinhagen's New Year's Day thing was, this is going to be an interesting year because we're going to have more change and more scale faster than any time in history.
Okay. So expect more of the same at larger scale.
Well, I mean, I know he's not basing that on any. It's a moral message about what the audience should expect. He can't science that at all, right? He can look at all the data, and it says same thing it says to me or anybody else or in the field, which is this looks bad. I don't see a way out of this. There's no way
There's
out.
no way out.
There's not gonna happen. But saying this is gonna be the year. He's gone from to saying, like he said in the past couple weeks, it's gone from the next 3 to 10 years. And you can tell in his voice, he doesn't want to say 10. 10 is just where is the outlier. So everybody's going to be right. It's going to end up being 2030. Right? I mean, it's 20.
We don't want to believe it because it's just such an awful narrow passage that we have to make it through.
Everybody was converging on 2030, right? Back when we were all trying to figure this out, right? Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, right? We started to see this happening, right? It's going to happen. And of course, Armstrong was there, Turchin was there. I was working on it. I mean, a lot of us were seeing. They call us heterodox, right? But really, people who look at the anticipation of present trends as reaching failure points, not continuing in a straight line into
right.
And so we look at opposing forces, in other words, exhaustion of opportunities that will result in change. And so the cycle guys, Turchin came along. I'm bringing up Armstrong a lot because I'm trying to reinforce him. All these guys came out. So I mean, I haven't really changed my frame since 2004. Right. In other words, I've been wrong on China. Right. I said that I've been wrong on China. I thought this would happen closer to 2020 than to 2030. Well, if the next 3 years is 2025, right? So
wow.
Right. So some guys are 2030, and I think most guys are now repeating the same mantra that the 2016 election in COVID accelerated it. All right. So we're getting there. So this is going to be interesting. I just can't see how it doesn't play to our advantage. I just see it playing to our advantage phenomenally, because chaos is our friend right now. Right, the disabusement of the fantasy that the post USSR will continue.
Right. It's like the issue is that my favorite memes are like this. It's like you see the oppressed person, right, by whatever means, right, and they're being told to vote harder. It's like this. It's like the disabuse of the notion that voting is going to fix anything. You're going to vote your way out of tyranny. It's like, and that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And more people are understanding that's not going to happen. So they're going to organize for the purpose towards the resolution of this problem of tyranny by other means. That's what's going to happen. And so it's like that, and understanding what's going to happen allows you to front run it, right? And that's where we are. We're just front running what's going to happen scene. That's the purpose of adaptation, right? End up where everyone's going to be and make a lemonade stand. Because they're going to need lemonade when they get there. They're going to be tired and thirsty, right? That's all. Right, so that goes to who made the money in the gold rush in San Francisco. It was Levi Strauss and the coffee salesman. I don't remember which one it was, but it's like the guy selling stuff to the miners, right? Selling shovels.
It's like my favorite one was the egg farmers, how much they could get for eggs, right? And the price of an egg, basically, as really? So I mean, because what does it take to? I mean, it's fucking chickens, all right. They can grow in your backyard. I mean, they don't take
they eat bugs.
So, anyway, so I was trying to go on an arc there, and I think I might have lost it, which was that I expected it to happen earlier because that's the mistake I usually make. I can't understand how long it takes the common folk to.
They need more lily pads.
No, just one thing about knowing why you tend to be wrong is you can now compensate for the tendency that you tend to be wrong, right? I mean, I was right on timing of the stuff in the States, right? Because we had great information, and it was right in front of me every day, and I'm basically a consulting company is a spy organization, right? So I'm inside the top, Fortune 400 companies, and then in some cases I probably know more than they do because the way not they do collectively, but I mean, if you're surprised at how little people in these organizations understand about the environmental condition of their organization outside the particular individual's window into it, right? And so even anyway, so I was very involved in this. At that point I was tracking, back in the OOs, I was tracking spreadsheets full of trends in consumer purchase goods, watching because I was very interested in what was happening as the technology was moving through the world, and how readily I saw the collapse of what we would see today as the home built computer market, and the rise of the laptop and this other shit. So that was all really obvious. So certain things were really very clear to me because of my understanding of monetary policy, where the economy was going. How I understood that the Austrians were correct, and that we were going to get a correction in 2008. So it was whatever. So I mean, I had that all figured out. But China, someday we're going to have enough data to know how the fuck they got away with that for that long, right? Amazing to me. Obviously we know what's going on in Russia, but I mean, you look at these things and they're pretty predictable because people adapt at certain rates. If you just realize the 3 second, 3 minute, all the way up to 3 year problem, and then it's multiple 3 years per, you just sort of like, okay, well, I mean, I could just plot this out on a fucking adoption curve, right? Adoption and commoditization curve, or utility and dissipation. So, I mean, it was essentially my hobby, but my hobby was related to my profession.
Right.
So it was pretty easy to figure this stuff out. I mean, I was like, I'm like, professors, you got to teach a bunch of classes, and I got to run a business. But I mean, I have the same amount of time to work on thought work as you do. I mean, it's no different, other than I don't have to put up with grading papers. I have to do employee reviews. I can't even hand that off. So you get into this and you see where it's all going, but I'm not a really good judge of. I haven't changed my frame since that period. What I've learned is mostly about myself, which is that I have poor visibility into the vox populi's rate of adaptation to change. In other words, how does the Overton window move? Right. So I see it as, what I see is the convergence of causes, not the rate at which democratic polities adapt. Does that make sense?
Say that again. The conversion, you see it as
I understand the convergence of causes because I think in incentives, but I don't have a good handle on how shit moves through a population.
The adaptation of
right. I just don't, and
I'm not even structure.
Right. I'm not even good at listening and understanding. Like I can see when people are talking, I see a pattern in the language, but it's the pattern in the language I understand, I'm not empathizing with them. I mean, once I see the pattern in the language, I can see it. So once you understand that, it was a normal autistic thing. It's nothing, I'm not, so now I can sort of adjust for it, and I can rely on you guys, right, the team, and to say, well, where is the population? But the thing that's just blown me away is the trigger. The manosphere started back in what, the 90s, or was the early 2000s?
I don't know, but yes,
but
it started out as like a pickup scammers and.
Yeah.
But it's like, but then it evolved, and it's like the what's going on now is talking to guys about how to realistically deal and manage the cooperation between men and females.
Right. So the huge thing that's interesting to me is the bottom up evolution of that discipline into a science that's now superior, relatively so, superior to the academy in producing evidence. And one of those reasons, of course, is the data we get out of places like OkCupid, which is highly transparent. That's not like, it's not like Match, right? But OkCupid is highly transparent. So they share this data because it's fascinating to them and to us, right? And so you get, I saw this one this morning, I booked it this morning, that this idea that, the top men are getting whatever is not really true. It's just that all the noise we see is up there, right? But the people tend to be pairing just like we'd expect them to pair within their sexual market value. So that tells me something very interesting. I'm trying to not go into that off the top of my head because I want to go read the primary research instead of, like, I can vision the graphs in my head right now, but I haven't read the primary research behind it. Until I do that, I don't want to quote it, right? But what I understand is true. All right. So the point I want to make is people are still pairing off at sexual market value. So my opinion goes back to the problem is the export of jobs available to men in the lower 2/3. I mean, that's the problem.
That makes sense.
That's the underlying problem. And so what's happening is that you have the stupefaction of college, so that the suit the demand of women, and when the stupefaction of college content is absolutely, it's ridiculous pseudoscientific nonsense, creating hostility in the population and unreasonable expectations, right? So we have that asymmetry. We don't have college for men. We have college for elite men or above average men. And we have college for below average and below average women. But we don't have the equivalent investment in the productivity of men. And that's because the difference between the clerical introgression into the workforce, which is what we call the church produces indulgences, right? The indulgence, which is basically a filtering position, so that the academy doesn't have to figure out, not the academy, the employers don't have to figure out you're incompetent, right, or not, right? That's what college has been. You're paying $150,000 to have a silly girl job, right, in HR or fucking marketing or some stupid shit, right? It's which means you're not having children or a house, and it also means you're not getting a husband, because now you can't associate with people who your sexual with are in your sexual market value, right?
Because you're getting paid too much money, and they can't make enough money, and
that's it.
There's just a generation of a mismatch,
right? And so I've had this conversation a couple of times lately. Is that when I'm looking at other people, they attribute to social phenomenon too often what is a series of incentives because of economic phenomenon. And so my view, of course, is that reshoring, on a scale we're going to have to reshore.
I think it's occurring.
It is occurring. It is going to ameliorate some of this. And then the obvious correction of the end of community property and marriage, child support, and alimony, that's going to do the rest. When those two things happen, a lot of this stuff will go away, because more than 40% of people are still meeting on dating apps. So the thing is that the average person gets like 4 hits a month.
That's plenty.
Which is, I mean, I get more than that, and I don't even I mean, I just have
you have a silly icon.
No, I'm not going to mention the site because I don't want to promote it, but I have one for people over 55, right? In which I'm pretty decent commodity in over 55, right?
Hot tamale, they say.
What?
hot tamale.
Not hot, but I mean, there's a market for guys like me. Now, would I find anybody interesting on these sites? Absolutely not, because the kind of woman I'm interested in is I'm going to meet that person in person. And besides the fact that my virtues are interpersonally ascertainable, not nobody cares about if you're a guy, your list of accomplishments, women don't, they want to know if you got money and they can handle you, right? I mean,
Right.
it's not complicated, right? And I won't give away the secret of having great sex in this sort of thing here, which is women are easy. So I mean, really, it's just so women are programmatically easy if you can do it. Right. I mean, it's not even, you just got to be able to look at women like any other fucking project and view it as a job, right? I mean, it's just, they're easy. And then you get all the benefits, right?
Right.
So you sort of play with this game and you realize that, well, I mean, I get so many a month, right? And I don't ever respond or,
right.
I just want to know what do these different sites do for my demographic? And what is the difference?
You're doing your other job, which is you're performing your consultant spy job.
That's all I really.
Just because you're interested in it, it's your hobby.
And it's not lying, right? I'm not putting up a fake account, right? If I put up a fake account, I wouldn't learn as much from it as if I just put up the real account because I know, right? So, I mean, I get a very consistent type of woman, right? And they come and they're all reasonably attractive. I mean, they're older now, but I mean, I get and I know what I get. But the point is that I get what's normal. If I get 4 women coming to a guy a month, right? I don't do anything. I don't send any messages. I just have the profile. Right? If I get 4 or 5 a month, and I probably get more than that, it's more like 6, right? 6 or 8. And I get that many on this one site. This is the one site I'm thinking about, right? Right. And so I say, well, okay, well, that's all I could fucking deal with anyway.
That's right. That's a flood.
I couldn't deal with that anyway. I mean, if I had 1 a week, right, that I could actually
process that information, right?
Process that person, have a few phone calls, talk a little bit about life, do a little video, I mean, I can't do more than that, right? And I don't fucking want it to be a job, right? I mean, if you're doing that,
so otherwise it's too much work.
Well, it also means you're fucked up, right? If if this is a hobby that you do part-time at a pace where you can, that's fine. But if you're like out here desperately trying, you shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
Right. You should focus on yourself and your career and your income and your fitness and whatever. So, but my point is that it's not quite as, it's like everything. Social media is an amplifier of differences. That makes sense?
Now, I want you to define what amplifier of differences means.
So if you and I live in let's go backward in time. So today, right? I'm sort of an upper middle class guy, right? So you go up in this universe, right? And you go to college and you associate with people like you, and you go to workforce. Right. You associate with people like you, right? And you sort of have this window of people who associate, and you know when somebody's above you or below you, too far out of your range, right? It's like, when you're in a room with a woman who's very well off, that woman will talk to me because of my status, but would never be interested in me.
Right.
All right. So you get those. If a woman's an entrepreneur of a company, she will find me very interesting.
Right.
That just happens, right? Then you go, but so you have these arenas, right? So the thing is, your positive and negative reinforcement is fairly narrow, right? How did you frame the question? You said,
what is the amplifier of differences? How is social media an amplifier of differences?
So what happens with social media is we are now exposed to people outside of that circle. And right. I don't mean just they're outside, they're in other circles. They're way the fuck out, right? And I mean, and you've teased me about this all the time, right? I mean, it's like, why do you even answer these fucking morons? I don't know. Right. And there are people if in real life I wouldn't recognize existed.
Right.
Right. I would treat them like furniture, not like badly, but I mean I would ignore them. Right. And I wouldn't give them the time of day if they bothered me in person. But the answer is they'd never get to me.
Right.
There's no vehicle
Right.
for them to come in contact with me other than if they're like a retail sales clerk or a waitress.
Right.
That person could never come in contact with me in a personal circumstance. They could, like if they're, working in anything where there's customer exposure, right? But those people get indoctrinated in the middle class ethics by the fact that their job makes them have the middle class ethics.
Right.
So what happens in social media is you are put in what feels like a level playing field,
right,
despite the vast differences in altogether. So the same thing is happening in these dating sites. Now there is a little bit of market segmentation to dating sites, right? You can, Match is the great one in the middle, right? If you're going to be married, or there's the Christian one, and
right.
OkCupid should be for more educated people, and then there's my favorite, which is, I don't know what it's called, sugardaddy.com or something like that.
My. And other sites for further misbehavior.
I couldn't believe the number of women who called me, who posted really direct offers, like for $700 a month, I'll do all these things for you and whatever.
Oh my Lord. It comes with the tag, the price tag's on there. It's like, that's nice. It's very direct.
I was floored by it, really. I mean, I never expected.
Wait, unbelievable. Like, whoa.
And the numbers.
Curt is just like, Curt has arrived in some J.R. Heinlein movie from the future. He's like a parallel world that he never thought could possibly exist from the world that he came from.
So this is like, I'm thinking in 2008 terms, right? In this particular case, right? So the world's changed a lot. That's 14 years ago. And so it's way worse, right? I mean, it's the same shit happens, but only
no, it's just more obvious.
Well, that's the point I'm trying to make is that you will sort, no matter what, into that same group that you would have sorted into because you're in a class. So instead of, think of it this way. So I said, I'm going to go back. Now let's start at the present and go backward in time. So in the past, there'd be like, your tribe would be 150, 160 people, right? It's X number of bands of X number of people, right? And the truth is, you trade girls and men across these things, and you're all gossiping and telling each other shit and whatever. But but a band is the maximum supportable redistributive unit that can survive as a hunter-gatherer at the time, right? So you're aware of your group really clearly, and then you got like some insight in the other group. But what's the real difference? So now let's take that, say, okay, let's make a class structure and make those into class structures.
Right.
And so now what we can see is up and down the class structure, but you're still going to mate and marry inside.
That's right. Your information is right here in your horizon.
But you have the illusion of the class structure of choice.
Right.
Right. And so then now turn that class structure, instead of a square, right? And it's a orderly group, turn it into the triangles. So what class structure do you have, and what's its ethical frame? And now you've got these triangles, right? Okay. So you might go up and down, like by this degree, right, of rotation. Right. But you're not going to go from this person to this person across all these classes. So what's happened is, of course, is that what people are complaining about is the false promise of choice. All right, that's available. Now, does that make sense? So
No, wait. The false promise of choice.
You have more choice. You believe you may have more choices than you do.
I'm gonna have to rephrase that to make sure that I understand. Which is to say, the premise that you have more laterality with regard to your choices is an illusion that is not true.
Yes,
because you won't choose those.
and
You're
they
going
won't
to
choose
remain
you.
within some narrow band
Right.
that is acceptable to you, but you have the false sense that you could choose from way outside your strata.
Well, you can probably choose down much more easily than you can choose up, but people tend not to. In other words, the myth that people trade up and down, marry up and down, is one of marginal indifference, excuse me. In other words, I got this, man. I'm from a fancy family, so to speak, right? New England family. And when I got my first divorce, I went to a lawyer from a woman from another old New England family. And there's no royalty in America, but if you're from an old New England family, when you've got your werewolves apparently from Boston, I'm going to go figure that out, by the way, one of these afternoons when I got
It's my matrilineal group.
Matrilineal side. So if I go off in there, I'll figure that. But I mean, we're all sort of the same in some way, right? I mean, you're basically the people who came over here as Puritans. They weren't from the bottom, right? These are middle and upper middle class people that came over here, right? From New England, right? That's not the same for. It's certainly not the same for those boys down south there. They made their own aristocracy when they went down there. So you meet these people and you just know. It's like I can talk to another person that's from an old New England family. It's like talking to what a fault history. It's the same fucking thing, right? He's just from the more. I mean, Philadelphia versus Boston, same shit, right? So you can just tell because we just think different. I don't know how to describe it. So I go to her and she says, and I'm married. My first wife is a beautiful woman, an intelligent woman, from a large family, majority boys, right? So she knows how to interact with guys. Her parents are both educated. He's an engineer. I can't remember what his mother's educated in. There's educated people. So these are upper middle class people. Now, do they have the same kind of income? Well, I mean, not all upper middle class people make upper middle class incomes, right? I mean, upper middle class is a social function that can vary by economic utility in the moment, right? So just like my family, my father chose to make less income because he wanted to get away from my family. So you look at this, you say, she said to me, Curt, you married someone from the wrong side of the tracks. In other words, I married somebody who was really from the middle to upper middle, not from my family, which is upper middle to lower upper, right? And she said that just, you can't do that. You're gonna, right? You can't. And it's so fucking true. It's amazing. And how do you know what someone's class is? You know it by their morals, right? What their morals and norms are, right? The traditions, morals, and norms are. So my second wife, right, has aristocratic ethics, even though her parents are working class. Well, it's not really true. They're lower middle class. Like he owns his own business, right? So the lower middle class, but they're not highly educated or anything. But they're Scandinavian, so that accounts for being educated. I was just trying to throw that out there. See if
just seeing if I'm going to respond.
Just see if you're going to respond to it. You are a tough character, man. Anyway, so my point being really that it tends to work if you marry with somebody, as Ayn Rand said. I can't believe I'm going to quote Ayn Rand. Some with your same metaphysical presumptions.
Yes.
And those metaphysical presumptions will be class ready.
Yeah. Well, there probably is there's a function of that as a class defining element.
It is. That's how you test, right? So you get a person in the lower upper classes, there's plenty of them, who are not genetically clearly in that space. They're clearly middle class genetics, but their family's position has put them in a lower upper class position for some coincident event, good marriages, accidents of relationships, circumstance, whatever. Or the tendency of all genetic groupings to regress toward the mean, right? I mean, that's the tendency of all populations, if not very selectively bred, will always regress to the mean of the population they're breeding with. It's important. So you meet these people and they're like, I'm like, no, you're not upper class. What you've got though is they've got the metaphysics, right? They've got the metaphysics of the lower upper class. And so are they genetically there? Well, not really, but they have the trust structure, right? The responsibility structure, the self-regulatory structure, whatever. They have all that stuff. And they're doing fine. And they're doing fine, right? They can hold that position. They'll probably over time their family will regress back to upper middle or middle class.
Right.
So, but in essence, unless they continue the selective breeding process, which is what matters, right? I mean, selective breeding is what who you marry is way more important than anything else, right? Because especially for your lineage, right? So when you look at that stack, that triangular stack, right, you're going to mate within some dimension there, and if it is, and what you'll find is that, yeah, people who are relatively the same in attractiveness tend to mate, right? And people who are relatively same in class tend to mate, right? Now it's usually not this big a difference, right? It's one up or down one, but the difference between the what we call the middle classes, especially in America, is quite broad. I mean, it's like a third of
That's right. It's a wide band.
Right. So there's a huge difference before we get down to the lower middle class. Right. Right. So, you're talking about a huge fucking band of people, which is shrinking, of course, but it's a huge band of people. So there's like subclasses within the middle class, right? So but you'll still probably stay within the middle class arena, right? So the point is that a lot of the stuff we're seeing in social media is creating a lot of illusion. And the question is creating a lot of illusion for who? People who are frustrated. Yeah, right. In other words, for those of us who get five hits a day in a dating site, 5 hits a month or whatever, right? And we can actually interact with those people. It's not a problem, because we don't have we don't have magical thinking forcing us to believe that we're going to meet with one of these people, right? But there's people who are down here and they're artificially down here when they are actually here, right? In other words, if you take a male who's not physically exercised and not educated in male competition and sportsmanship and cooperation, he's going to be down here, right? Whereas the woman who is there by being, not doing,
right,
is there, right? So if you take away the economics, the education, and the adversarial competition, the team working, you're going to depress, even though he's looking at us as, well, you're right.
We're evil. We're even, but we're not even.
We're not. But and is he not even because of his fault? Well, right. He could correct for it at extraordinary personal cost. But if I get to hang out with guys and play video games, I mean, the number of guys that do this is just beyond me. I mean, it's like the fucking opium epidemic in China, right? I mean, it's just a thing.
No, it is, and I want to underscore that, because it is neurotransmitter abuse.
Right. Oh, it is. It is really good. Thank you. It's like that. I played Asheron's Call. I can't remember the name of it. I can't believe I remember the name of it, by Microsoft, for 1 month, and I realized it was doing to me. I just stopped. I'm never playing one of these fucking games again, because it's bad for you, right? But I mean, if that's the only feedback you get, I mean, I'm saying that as a guy who's building companies, right? I mean, so my time is.
That's right.
Is valuable. My sleep is valuable, and my dopamine is valuable, right? I mean,
right.
It doesn't mean I didn't enjoy it and didn't think it was.
No, you recognize that you enjoyed it more than you should.
So, but it's essentially taking drugs, which is what your point.
Absolutely.
There's neurotransmitter abuse. So, but you can't complain of that guy if he can't get a job that's whatever. Education is an irrational expense that will actually damage him. He's been prohibited from learning adversarial competition, prohibited from fitness through adversarial competition, and prohibited through the development of teams, which create the basis of all major male social networks. Right. So I mean, if you've deprived this guy because he's been put through a feminine education system, I mean, and then you offshore the work.
And he can't match with the girl that's matched to him properly.
Right. Well, that's the point. He can't do it. Right. And so this girl now was really here, but she's got a degree through credentialism has brought her here in a period where people don't realize these are non-jobs. Right. Right. So you wonder why this is happening. It's like, well, of course. Right. Of course it's happening. So, but the point I'm trying to counter a little. I started out with saying the manosphere was doing a lot of science and doing from the bottom up there. We're rediscovering the truth of human nature, despite of female nature in particular, but female nature that we artfully disabused ourselves out of in order to raise the status of women, right? In order to include them. Right? So we've spent a lot of time doing that. And, you know, if you look at through history, women are pretty awful creatures. It's true. If you look at law, they're horrible. I mean, I won't even go there. No. So men are bad and women are evil. Oh, this is so true. So you go. So I'm looking at this and saying, well, is this really true though? That no, it's creating a false illusion due to an artificial economic incentive circumstance that will correct itself over time.
Yes.
So I come back to it. Okay, well, the intellectual part I enjoy is that we're restoring the reality of female nature as a science, the social science, which will bring about the possibility of reconciliation at some point. And and this divergence in the economy will become reconciled relatively quickly over the next 10 years. The problem is we're left with a demographic tragedy that looks like a great plague and the demographic distribution. Sorry, did I take way too long to make that?
No, it's all good. It's just it's interesting.
So it's not really, in other words, social media has exposed us to information under an artificial and qualitarian environment that under which, in other words, the social media produces the perception of inequality, which creates a perception of a plenty, a resource that doesn't exist.
Right.
And likewise creates the perception of a scarcity that doesn't exist.
So I would say it amplifies the truth will out. And it creates connections that wouldn't otherwise exist to allow information to flow where it was otherwise insulated.
Yes.
And so it destroys false bubbles.
Yes.
Right. That's the issue, that they're no longer insulated.
Can I say something really horrible?
Please.
Because I've been doing a little study of TikTok.
Okay.
There's no good data, which is one of the reasons I want it to be national, domestic. If we're going to keep, I think we should shut the fucking thing down. But if we don't shut the fucking thing down, then we need to bring it into the States, because the algorithms they use in China are those that are constructive, but the algorithms they use in the United States are destructive.
Yes.
And so what I find is really interesting is, why are there so many advancements of homosexuality, sexual stuff, homosexuality stuff, both directions, promiscuity, OnlyFans stuff, but more unfortunately, the things that wouldn't naturally pile up, which are intermarriage, right? And I mean, it's a pretty negative. It's a projector of negative norms. What I find really interesting is why are women as crazy as TikTok demonstrates them to be? Because I don't think
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I don't think so. I think the algorithm is weighted to produce the worst, and I don't think the worst is what would naturally, because it's not what happened that's not what happens on YouTube, right? So why would the worst?
An AI imposition.
Well, it's just waiting, right? I mean, you start finding content and they just wait it, right? And AI is just people give AI, what we have today isn't AI. What it is called Bayesian accounting, which is it can calculate an account for more variables, into more categories than humans are capable of doing on our own.
Okay.
So think of it as we had to invent accounting to be able to keep track of stuff at scale, right? That's what but Bayesian accounting, Bayesian is the same fucking thing. It's just accounting at bigger scales. And just like you roll stuff up into accounts, that's what the later layers, the narrower layers, do in a neural network. So right. It's I don't like it being called accounting. You could call it categorization, which is most disambiguation, and categorization, which is what our brain does, right? And disambiguation and categorization. But neural networks largely do the same thing. They disambiguate and categorize. Well, they do this by weights, right? And the weights are best. So if you get something, so if you just tune a weight for a particular concept, it'll show up more.
Right.
Right. So they've obviously tuned it to degeneracy, and this is attracting content that is doing what you called earlier, which is abuse of neurotransmitters. So I understand. I don't have a problem with Facebook's, right? In other words, Facebook has two feeds. They have the feed and they have your feed. This is important is the things that it's raising up from your network versus the things it's raising up from the network.
Okay.
So like if you're just listening to things that are coming from your people and the people they're connected to, right? That will tend to produce a bias in favor of whatever you're interested in. But Facebook wants to bring in other things that help generate ad revenues. Somewhat like Twitter, they want to bring in ad revenues, right? So they're trying to bring in things that get attention. Well, what gets attention other than moral outrage?
Right.
Most attention-seeking thing we have. So moral outrage is going to compel you to act. So I'm like, well, Facebook is not as bad as TikTok. First of all, because content has to be read, right? Twitter is bad because the only thing you can post in short form is moral outrage. OnlyFans is like the worst. Is like it's nothing but bad. And then basically, as far as I can tell, the primary function of what are all those picture things? The female men do processes like content, like men basically do YouTube, and women do the picture ones, like what is it called? Pinterest, not Pinterest. Instagram and Snapchat and right these things, right? So it's just very obvious, right? So the female versus male demographic distributions. Well, so you just look at this and you say, well, they've got to be generating negative stuff for us. Because are women as bad as it looks like they are in these things? Well, they might be, but
I don't know. That's a good question. But it's like, because I'm reading the book, De Malleus Maleficarum, which was written in 1450, and it's like this. It said the same thing.
What does it say?
It's like the women are the the men sorcerers are worse than the women witches, but the women are more predisposed to allowing these evil spirits to enter and act.
Yes, it's true.
And it's like this old information. It's
I mean,
not new, nothing new under the sun. It's just like we kind of cover it up once in a while and
well, the problem is
take
you can't.
advantage of it.
You see this in early early cuneiform records, right? Because it's all about magic spells and shit. Well, the problem is putting your mind back there is, in other words, like you can put your mind back in the witches and witches time, right? It's not, we have enough context to go back there, right? We can sort of go back to the Roman times a little bit, right?
Right.
Surprisingly difficult to go back to Greek times.
Huh.
Right? Because if you read the Greek there in its original form, it's a lot. It's like reading Victorian versions of things, right? Right. We read the Victorian versions of the Greek, and it's not that nice. It's really brutal and bloody in its original form. And so if you try to translate old Greek things like their letters, it's hard. It's like the idiomatic content or the conceptual content is very difficult to read. Well, try to do that for cuneiform.
Right.
Because it's not written all of it. It's written more like scripture, like is
right.
Sentences, right? But if you get a hold of like letters in late Egypt. Well, Egypt's 3,500 years long, so a letter we read in Egypt you think is ancient is actually post-Greek, right? I mean, you got to go to early Egyptian, right? Well, the problem with going back into, let's say, Ur, right, is that if you're reading stuff, because I was fascinated by this when I was a teenager, you read stuff written Ur, it's you can't step into that mind, right, very easily. You have to read a lot of theirs of Sumer, right? You'll read the right. You can read any of this stuff. You have to read a lot of it before you can sort of get into their mind. But they're the ones who invented all these evil demons and shit like that, right? Because that's how they expressed everything. Where right. We would have sorcerers and witches, because the origin of religion, as we understand it, is from there. Well, it's Turkey, but so it's Mesopotamia. So they've been working with this metaphor for a long time. So they're storytell by these demons and whatever. But you can tell by the spells how they thought about men and women.
Because it's like the whole thing is psychological.
It is psychological, but that's
so it's trying to describe psychological functions, and it's like generating these premises that are like abstractions, right?
Yeah, but it works. It's programming, like you brought up earlier. So, if you get a program and it runs in your head, right? You get a program in your head. It's like getting up and reciting something else or a prayer. It doesn't make any difference. It's running in your head. It's going to interrupt and eventually any activity that could interrupt that will allow you to influence it. Well, and of course, spirits and demons provide you incentive to keep this thing in your head, right? I mean, it's not complicated. The same thing as some of my favorite stuff I've studied along these lines is the old Irish myths that are pre-Christian, because they still survived, right? We can still get one of them. And when you look at what they told women back then, I mean, and the women believe shit. It's fucking insane, right? But and that's reasonable. You can go back there into that mind, and you can understand that. Right, that primitive European,
right,
pre-Christian, because pre-Christian Ireland isn't really that long ago.
Not that long ago.
But try to step back into Ur. So, but the point I'm trying to amplify your point is that when we look at the consistency among the psychological devices, this concept of men and women. So the weird question is, how did we get this concept that women weren't evil? Where did that come from? That's the hard question.
Where did this misconception come from?
Well, no, that's it's actually profoundly insightful. Where does even talking about women come from? Right?
Right.
Where does even mentioning them come from?
Right.
And then where does this idea that they're good come from? Because in most of history, women are
But because they're essential is the problem.
right.
That's the problem, because men are going to be doing all the talking and the writing, and they're going to be, women are essential. And it's like, this is a problem because they're such a pain in the butt.
Well, they're greedy, petty, right? Manipulative, children. But in the West, because the way we fought wars, right?
Yeah.
In other words, we had to rely on militia. Women got to where they could get pretty powerful. You to Sparta.
Oh, yeah. Very funny.
And so where did we get the idea that women were horrible from?
Weren't horrible.
Yeah. Because look at if you read Edwardian literature versus Victorian, it's pretty interesting. Who was saying it the other day? Reading, was it you? A female author back in 1800. There's no, I can't remember who's saying this. Somebody I was talking to said, well, you go back there's no continuity, there's no plot to her story. Female stories have no plot. They're just a record of experiences that randomly happen in time. So what's interesting is, where did we get female authors who actually wrote plots? Like, it's kind of funny. What's the female version of Sherlock Holmes? I can't remember her name.
Mary,
or Mary Shelley. Where did we get women who had actually wrote plots? Because that's not history. When people say women invented the novel, that's sort of true, but there's no fucking plot to it. It's just a record of experiences that women go through as they're victimized by the environment, which is pretty close to how women perceive the world. What's the matter? Did I run?
No, I'm processing. It's like there's an author who was in the French Revolutionary time that I think you're thinking of.
No, I'm thinking of like Jane Austen. And then you go back to the Romans and the Greeks, and you find a few female authors, but it's like a sequence of experiences. I don't know why I'm having to just
It's all right.
pause for a second here. Sorry about that.
No.
What are you looking up?
I'm just trying to provide you information to I'll give you to track my family a little bit if you're interested later.
I would love to know.
There you go. So it's an interesting interesting question. Where did that illusion come from, right?
Yes.
And I don't have a good answer for that question because that's an unusual one. I think it has to do with the same introjection of the feminine into the polity, sir.
Probably. The more integration women have into the polity,
The more they're going to obfuscate that reality.
well, I think the more as they become contributory. But they drag along with them the female instincts, right?
Yes.
Right, and the female advantages. I mean, it's simply truth that the females accumulated power in Sparta, which is one of the reasons it fell. The women accumulated power in Rome, which is one of the reasons it fell, and the women accumulate power here in European civilization, which is good to fail. So the problem is not letting anyone accumulate power, but it's more importantly not letting women accumulate power.
Especially not them.
Well, I mean, we're about to, if our work and the work of others ends up, I mean, the big experiment has been the inclusion of women over the past century. Well, what we're going to end up is proving, like everything else, is that we were right beforehand, which is that that we aren't all equal, and women have no temperament, lack the temperament for the hard decisions of politics because it's contrary to their intuition and nature. Does that mean all women? No. But so it's like, well, how much of a security blanket do we want to put on our polity? Do you want to prevent women? Do you want to set a standard for women? Do you want to set a standard for women and give them their own house? Which is where I would be. I'd set a standard for
That
men
seems reasonable to me
women
because
and
it's
give
like
women their
all
own
other
house.
things are too hard.
Well, I mean, and then you specially prohibit involuntary I mean, I suppose you get the right answer out of doing that, right? I mean, I don't see why you wouldn't. I'm actually of the thing. I was like, I don't know if I care about women ever having an opinion about anything big like war.
Okay.
Right. But in the sense of there are questions that are, it's even clear women shouldn't have an opinion about education. Right. But it isn't, I'm not sure where the delineation would be if you have women in politics, in the political system at all. If they're, it's like people say, well, you want liberals in the church and conservatives in government. I would say that's probably true, right? So the church is a voluntary method of organization and taxation, not a forceful one. And so we say, well, then you would have the women in the church and the men in the state, and that would probably work out okay, because the natural equilibrium between women in those areas will work out fine. But the problem is what do you mean by church now? Well, since they've now removed themselves from, the women have removed themselves from trustworthiness in education. Now what do we do? What does the church mean? If the church isn't responsible for education, all right, well, what is it? Is it responsible?
The issue is that they're irresponsible in education.
Yeah.
Liberals are irresponsible in education because they're using forceful taxation to support their nonsense.
Yes. Education is capitalization. Care is consumption. And so it's,
but they're using the education for consumptive purposes.
Exactly. So the question is, can women, what about, I mean, what about elder care? What about hospital nurses and hospitals and that kind of thing? Does it matter that there are women are there versus men?
No, but it's like I had an interesting conversation in the airport with a nurse, and she was complaining about the abuses that are occurring in that very environment.
Really?
And she's right, which is like this. It goes to the same problem that's in the educational system, which is they're using forcible collection of goods by the state and redistribution through these networks, which is in this case, the medical establishment. In the other case, it was the academic establishment. They're using it for purposes that it was not designed to do, using monopolistic means to collect their. So its use is force instead of voluntary, which is the problem.
Okay, so but that says, okay, now we're stuck with there's no place for women except volunteer organizations.
Volunteer, it's like when you look at the hospital system evolved from a voluntary function, which is people are trying to help and people it's an agreed upon consensual operation, whereas it has evolved into you owe me and I am due this, and it fails because it's power based as opposed to consensual agreeable operation. And that's where the failure point is, because it's like, even if you look at, you were discussing the marriage, child support and all these things. It's no longer consensual. It's force-based, monopoly power, orders. So it goes to a duty and orders and authoritarian power-based system. And that is with the point of failure.
So basically, women can never have authority.
They can have influence, just like everybody should have influence, but nobody should have power. To bring our conversation to a complete arc. Because the system fails when it goes to monopoly and power. Because now someone's going to be morally outraged that you've demanded some duty of them which they did not agree to.
This might just end up being criminalization. I don't know. And how can, if we can't handle it by creating a market with natural incentives, then we have to create a market with institutional disincentives.
You have to provide disincentives to misbehavior.
Yeah, but their instincts, or the female instinct outside of her own self and her children, is essentially criminal.
Maybe. And that's okay. It's just, if it's criminal, then it's prohibited. If she can restrain herself and she won't behave like a criminal, then she won't be punished for being a criminal.
I'm trying to falsify.
Just like the man, right? It's just like men's misbehavior.
Well, I'm agreeing with you, but we've exhaustively addressed male and female political behavior. Now we're down into what's a question of whether it's commercial behavior or not. If I go into women and commercial behavior, and a lot of clerical function, they're fantastic. A lot of relationship functions, a lot of sales functions, they're fantastic. But any organization that brings women into the management structure eventually becomes, Dulu swims left. Dulu swims left. So the problem is that they become anti-competitive, because that's not a woman's job. Is not to, her instinct is to seduce or bribe behavior, not to demand or force behavior. So we get this left-leaning, any organization you're bringing a woman to, and they eventually destroy its competitive capacity. Well, they destroy its competitive capacity in innovation, production, distribution, whatever. That doesn't mean they destroy its competitive ability in sales, relations, and
yeah, but the issue is it can only exist in the monopoly protection of a masculine system that artificially supplies it beyond what it has earned.
Correct.
So it necessitates the monopoly function of the monopolization of the central authority for the purpose of supplying that which is not sufficient to exist upon its own.
We can outlaw that behavior. Well,
yes.
So we have to work on this a little bit. All right. We have gone over our 2 hours and 30 minutes. I am obviously not. I'm having a little problem here. I was just talking too much. which is the thing that happens pretty often. Not to be. So I would look, can we pick up on this? This is a good question. We haven't worked about how do you control women's behavior? How do you adjust for the female intuition? Well, they can't innovate, right? They can't promise. Oh, fuck, this is horrible. I just had a terrible insight. How do you adjust for female behavior? How do you, what laws are required to constrain female antisocial behavior that they believe is pro-social?
Okay.
In other words, how do you prevent that? How do you put women in charge, controlling for scarcity? And then what's worse is that you have your problem, which you bring up, is how do you prevent bureaucracies from disequilibrium? In other words, the point of violating the point of homeostasis or security instead of the equilibrium between experimentation and security. How do you prevent the bureaucracy that women are under from it too? So we have the problem's the same. The information problem's the same. I would like to, I don't know when you have next time, but I would really like to work on
All right. I'm just making a note for what the question is so that we don't forget.
I gotta go. I'm gonna go make some lunch.
Well, this has been a wonderful event. This is episode 230102. This is your reminder. Hit like, subscribe, notification, leave us some messages, and don't forget to check out the contribute to the Institute website page.
Love you, man. Thank you for this great discussion. If I had juice, I'd love to, because we're really onto something interesting here. So let's hopefully I can watch the last 15 minutes of this before our next meeting.
There you go.
And we can pick up here because we have to revisit it to get my head in the space again, but this would be really,
that works.
Really fascinating. All right, love you, man. Thank you for all you do for us.
Yes, sir.
I'll talk to you later.
Adios.